if I were to think about what environment would I design that would frustrate a young boy, I would design a school. Dutifully getting my grades passed and go to the next level. And it took me years to recognize that I was kind of a zombie. And so part of my work with families over the last 15 years has been a recognition that this mindset is actually a killer for young people. And so as I started to read these books, I began to kind of look around and say, gosh, success is not what has been sold to me. Success is something actually very, very different. Schooling is a potential way for a person to be partially educated. But in the history of mankind, 95, 98% of the learnings that were of value were coming outside of any institution. They were coming in the home. Think about this, y'all. If your child can set their own goals and ask you for coaching and guidance, think about the freedom that gives to them and the freedom that it gives to you as a parent. We are entering a very, very different world, right? A world where individual interests can create incredible opportunities.
The parent whisperer and education disruptor is pulling no punches in this one. That's what's up next today, guys. So let's go. Well, hey guys, welcome into the Next Man Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you along with us for another episode. You know this, I'm Mark, and I'm honored to be your host in this conversation again today. Today's guest is Matt Barnes. Matt is a learning coach. He's a parent whisperer. He's an education disruptor. He's helping parents grow self-governing and self-driven learners. Just a little bit about Matt. Over the last 25 years, he's run an $18 million hospital department, distributed $500 million in philanthropy, led an education reform nonprofit, served on 10 educational boards, including a public and private college. And he's coached thousands on growing self-directed learners. This is the work that Matt is doing today, the passion that is fueling him. He's also a father of 3 amazing teens who were educated in traditional, hybrid, micro, and self-directed learning methods. One of whom was a valedictorian, another started college at 15 and recently published her first book, and the third is a 15-year-old communications consultant who is learning how to fly. And here's what Matt likes to say about them. All 3 of them are self-governing beasts. Are you catching a theme here? Matt is passionate about helping parents to develop kids who are self-driven learners, self-governing men and women when they become adults. And he brings that passion and energy in a disruptive and, as you'll hear, a dangerous to the institutional thinking way to our conversation today. This was such a cool conversation. John and I had a ton of questions that we asked and a ton that we didn't even have time to get to. But I know you're going to enjoy the engaging back and forth conversation and what Matt brings and how he inspires and challenges us to think about our roles as dads and as education guides and leaders for our kids in a different way. Okay, that's a little bit about Matt and enough from me. Let's get to this conversation with Matt Barnes. Here we go. Well, Matt, super excited to connect today. We've been trying to get this scheduled for a bit, so thank you for making it happen. We're going to get into a topic we haven't talked about before, and so I'm excited. I'm excited to hear your story, to pull that out, but also combine it with this topic. So thanks for being here, man.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thanks.
So I want to jump right in with this. I know you like to say, if the answer isn't education, you're asking the wrong question. Let's start there. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, yeah. So again, thanks for having me on the show. Looking forward to the conversation. Um, okay, that quote I use is based on the idea that if you disassemble almost any problem, the root of the problem is usually how we think, right? And so relational problems, it's how we think about the relationship, how we think about our role in the relationship. Political problems, it's usually based on how we think about how problems should be solved in a society. All of that drives back to how we are educated. And if we are educated in a way that causes us to think that it's someone else's problem to handle things, or I have no agency or no ability to influence the direction of my family or my neighborhood or my company or my city, then we are essentially creating young people who are passive recipients of whatever comes at them rather than leaders. And so if every issue goes back to how we're educated, then I believe that we've got to, as parents, as dads, we've got to play a much more strategic role in making sure our young people, particularly our young boys, are extraordinarily well educated, and that is not well schooled. It's a completely different conversation.
So I said this before we started recording. I'm going to say it again because it seemed to resonate with you. So when we think about education, or we think about this topic that we're talking about, it's often thought of as schooling.
Yes.
But we also say in this context often, let's elevate the question. Let's ask a better question. Let's elevate, zoom out, and see this from a bigger angle. And so I think what you're challenging us to think about here isn't just the schooling process, but the broader education process. Unpack that for a second, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. So, think about some of the greatest minds of our time, from Abraham Lincoln to Thomas Edison to, these are people who were self-learners. They actually spent very little time in school, if any, and the list is a really long list, but they were well educated. The difference is that schooling is a potential way for a person to be partially educated. But in the history of mankind, 95, 98% of the learnings that were of value were coming outside of any institution. They were coming in the home, principally, or in the workplace. What was happened is we've had an inversion of expectations around where our kids are educated. And so school has now assumed that responsibility, but school's never designed to educate kids on values, on social and emotional dynamics, on work, on heck, even frankly, problem solving. School was never really meant for that. It was really meant for the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it didn't really do that so well for most. Now school has absorbed the space that was historically the responsibility of parents. And as a result, we have, as parents, have moved away from our responsibility as the primary educator in our kids' lives. And we see the consequences of that in young people who are very confused, depressed, who are unaware of who they are, why they're on this planet, et cetera. These are things that really have to be handled over the dinner table, not at an institutional level.
The word outsourcing is coming to mind. Often I will say that you can't outsource the role of the father. You can't outsource certain roles. What I'm hearing you say is we've kind of outsourced to the modern schooling system the responsibility for education. And you didn't say this, but I think you can kind of infer from what you're saying that as a result, we've got problems today that we otherwise wouldn't have if we understood education more broadly or more holistically.
That's exactly right. And it really is to our detriment as a family, as a community, as a nation, when we do outsource these absolutely essential responsibilities. And again, no institution is positioned. I mean, from a scriptural point of view, but also just from a practical point of view, no institution is positioned to transfer family values, family knowledge, history from generation to generation other than the family. So and again, we can talk more about the consequences of that, but we see it all through society.
Matt, you're automatically making me think about the difference between what kids are taught to think and how they are taught to think. That's two different things. Can you speak to that for a second?
Yes, perfect. Right. So think about school. It is a standardized approach, meaning every kid comes into a school and this curriculum's already been defined, right? The right answers have already been defined. And so really the child from that point on is really put in a position of finding the right answers, the quote unquote right answers, and regurgitating them, right? Versus in a conversation, a dinner conversation, which, our family has all the time, not enough, frankly, but quite a bit, where there are no right answers. Actually, there are just trade-offs that oftentimes have to be made. And so when you are taught how to think, you start to weigh trade-offs based on your values, based on your strategy about how things work. If you're schooled, you're trained to answer the question as a right or wrong based on what an authority has told you is right or wrong. And again, in a democracy, that authority shows up in politics, that authority shows up in media personalities, that authority shows up in celebrity status, folks who are saying here's the right way to think. And our young people have been trained to accept truth from an authority. And again, that leads us down a very, very dangerous path as a democracy, I think.
So just to play on that for a little bit, Matt, I can imagine, like if my parents were listening to this 40 years ago and trying to hear through their lens, and I love my parents, it was a great experience. It still is. But trying to think through their lens or a lens like that, when you say things like there are no right answers, I can imagine the defensiveness, the heels kind of digging in, the pushback, and you begin to sound like this disruptor or like a dangerous person, so to speak, right? And I can see you smiling with that word. But like, how do you navigate in a conversation like we're having? How do you navigate through some of the pushback of, but there are right answers, and for the parents who really want their kids to grow up with those values and the character and the strength and the faith and that foundation, right? Train up a child in the way they should go. Sure. How do you work through some of that pushback?
Yeah, let me clean that up a little bit. When I'm talking about there are no right answers, there are no right answers that can be pushed on the child by an institution. There are only answers that come around based on the values of the family. And that's where truth lies, right? So when I'm talking to my kids about politics or media, we are searching for truth based on what we believe, right? I never want an institution to have that conversation with my kids because I don't know the value system and the value structure that they are bringing. And I think this applies to all kids, those like myself who are, out very clearly Christian and very clearly kind of evangelical, I would argue that. But it also applies to someone who is an atheist who says, I don't want other people to tell my children what truth is. It is a family conversation, and that's where the truth is found, rather than in an institutional setting. I hope that's making some sense. But I guess the key point is this, guys: who decides what truth is? That's, I think, the question that I'm going to really cause people to really challenge. Like your parents back in the day, my parents. Who decides? Is it you in a conversation over the dinner table? Or is it an institution who has political forces that are playing out in that dynamic, have enormous cultural forces, enormous economic forces that are all playing out? Who should decide? And I can't say that it should be an institution that makes that call. It's got to be closer to home, that also captures the uniqueness of the child. If the child's uniqueness is not part of that question around truth, then we're really imposing a belief system into a child that may not have may not be godly designed to actually to accept that and to actually move into that world. I hope that cleaned that up a little bit. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yes. Thank you. And I figured that's what you meant, but I'm hearing it again, kind of through the lens of that parent that really wants to do right by their kids and believes that there are some truths that they want to pass on. But the distinction between it can't come effectively from an institution, a bigger, broader institution. It must come from the institution of the family that's connected around common values and a common belief set.
Yeah. Look, can I go further?
Sure.
I actually do consider myself to be fairly dangerous. I'm dangerous to a structure in society that really prizes compliant people. I think that compliance is actually one of the most dangerous things for society to be. And I think we have been raising compliant kids for a very long time. And so I'm now challenging normal. And I'm saying that weird, someone who actually bucks compliance should become the new normal. That's how our democracy was founded. A lot of people who are saying, I'm going to challenge the basic assumptions around, life, liberty, and freedom. So yes, I consider myself dangerous, but dangerous in the cause of liberating kids, families from structures that really aim to limit them and to create kind of robotic, compliant young people.
Matt, I know we want to get to your personal story quicker, sooner than later, but you've prompted all kinds of questions in my head. One of them is, what if a dad is listening and they say, I'm sort of behind. I've not been that voice that Matt is talking about. What's your encouragement to them, or like a next step kind of deal?
Yeah. Well, first off, every parent, I've worked with thousands of families, and every parent feels a sense of, sense of failure, that they either didn't do it right or didn't do it well enough or did it too late. And I feel it myself, and I've been in this space for a very long time. So for every parent, every dad, I would say, you have a unique responsibility, and that responsibility never ends until you're put in the ground. So even if your child is, teens or 20s or 30s, there is an opportunity to restart your influence on that child's life and direction. But it's going to require trade-offs. And that's a place for particularly for dads, oftentimes we're unwilling to kind of grapple with. The trade-off might be swallowing your pride. The trade-off might be cutting hours at work in order to create space to have one-on-one conversations and one-on-one time for your kids. It might be, instead of, going on vacation, you're actually thinking about these more like retreats with your kids, where the goal of it is not just to play. The goal of it is actually to connect, to have conversation, to enjoy one another's company in a way that allows for conversation rather than necessarily just playtime. So it's never too late, Dad. But it does require you to make the choice that you're going to engage in a completely different way. Let me say one other piece about this, John. When I use the term engagement, we usually use that term in a really kind of passive way, like, okay, I'm going to participate, right? And I say, no, I say engagement is like military engagement, right? Where you are making the choice, where you're going to now put yourself at risk in order to achieve a higher goal. So dads, when you think about engaging, think about it as a potential sacrifice of you and the things that are potentially important to you for some larger purpose, which is to make sure that your next generation has the benefit of your wisdom. That's what I would say is engagement.
And when they engage, reality is at times there's going to be a sort of adversarial voice somewhere else is speaking into their kid's life, right?
Bingo.
So That's a challenge in itself. I'm curious, what are the suggestions there when you're trying to be the voice?
Yes.
And man, you're hitting it hard because your kid is already somewhat trusting another voice.
Yes. This is partly for the dads that are starting early, they have young kids. This is super important that you listen to, what John's talking about, that if you wait longer, it's harder. It's always easier to prevent a problem than to actually treat it. So the dominant voice that is coming at kids nowadays is actually from media. And again, media has tons of, financial incentives to scare your kids or to, lead them down all sorts of paths. And so for the parents of younger kids, you've got to be really strategic about how often and how much you give access to media for those young kids. For the older kids who have actually consumed that media and they now have a worldview that, that thinks that maybe, celebrity is the highest aim, you now have to get into that same media that they have actually consumed. And you have to now start to see it, understand how the kids are thinking, and then begin to disrupt it from inside. So as an example, learn who your kids' favorite pop music artists are or athletes, and then start to learn about the details of that person's life. And what you'll find oftentimes is that pop star has a absolute disaster life that you can start to bring up to the child and go, wow, it sounds like there's some problems with being famous. Are you aware of those problems? And let's talk about those. So again, you're not trying to necessarily directly undermine, but you are absolutely trying to make sure that the child knows that as they're giving their heart to someone, they have to understand the condition of that heart, of the person that's, that is reaching out and inviting them to follow. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's an example of teaching them how to think.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's good. Really good.
One of the thoughts that's coming up is in reference to, John, a conversation you and I had a while back around coaching your kids. And in the coaching tool, listeners might get sick of us talking about coaching, but in the coaching tool or modality, you are really helping the other person to draw their own conclusions, to do their own wrestling, to do their own thinking. And sometimes it's guiding and directing, and often it's open-ended, and I heard that in your question, Matt, like in that hypothetical scenario, that statement or that question, boy, it looks like there might be some problems around celebrity. What do you think? Like inviting kids into a conversation like that, John, to your point, is a way to really help them begin to learn how to think. This is relatively new for me. I turn 50 here in the near future. And for my schooling years, I didn't say it this way, but this was my pattern: memorize, pass, and purge. And that got me through. But it didn't teach me how to think and how to learn. And yes. When I found the coaching approach to life is like, oh, this is a better way. This is growth for me, because it opens up so many things for me as well as for somebody else. But like what you're inviting us to do is to consider how we might coach our kids, rather than just direct or tell our kids or impose on them in some ways.
Exactly, Mark. The language of coaching is actually what I tend to talk about. It's interesting that you guys use the same language. But coaching actually is misunderstood oftentimes by folks who are outside of the real sophisticated coaching world. They think of it as the dominating coach on the sideline who's throwing chairs and yelling at people. That's actually not what elite coaches do. I've got a good friend who's a multiple gold medalist in track and field, and he talks about the best coaches simply ask questions, and because the coach's goal is to create a self-leader, right? As a parent, you never want to be the person that is like driving your kid to be motivated, because that's short-term thinking. You want the child to learn how to self-motivate, because then they can motivate themselves from that point on. So the language of coaching is exactly right, but we've got to be careful about how we approach the, that mindset of a coach from one of a person that's walking alongside, training the child, making the child, preparing the child to lead themselves, or the domineering, do as I say kind of coach. And definitely the latter is a short-term activity.
Totally agree. I've used that analogy before. The type of coaching we're talking about here is not the guy with the sidelines with the headset and the clipboard directing everything and making sure it goes off perfect. It's a different way. And you use the term self-leader, self-motivated. I just today saw something that you put out on social, and I believe it was with your daughter, and the workout regimen or the fitness routine that she instituted. Talk about that, like as a real example of what this can look like in your own home.
Bingo. So just for context, y'all, I've got a 16-year-old at home. I've got 2 older child, but the story was about the 16-year-old who, after a lot of conversations about what is she feeling called to move towards in her learning, in her life, one of them is possibility of military academy, maybe Air Force or Naval Academy. And then I said, okay, well, if that's where you feel led, we're not sure yet, but if you feel like that's a possibility, what do you need to do in order to prepare yourself? And so she went and did the research, and she found out that one of those things was about fitness. And so without me telling her to do anything, she determined, okay, I got to do this many push-ups, these many sit-ups, etc. And then I worked as a coach to say, okay, well, if you want to learn how to do push-ups, how are you going to do that? If you want to create a structure of getting stronger over the next year and a half, what does that structure look like? So it's all about questions. And as I asked these questions, she began to create her own structure for fitness. And the video that I posted was her doing 26 push-ups after several months of working out. And I didn't have to tell her to get out of bed at 6 a.m. I didn't have to yell at her to come on, do one more. She was on it herself. And that is what I think about this, y'all. If your child can set their own goals and ask you for coaching and guidance, think about the freedom that gives to them and the freedom that it gives to you as a parent. Now you don't have to worry about your child because your child can learn their way out of situations. If you have to yell at your child to get them to do stuff, you're always going to be right there next to them yelling in their ear. That is not how we, in my view, how we want to prepare young people in a world that is constantly changing, that has forces coming in them from all sides at all times. We need the young people to be able to walk on their own with their supports around them. Of course, parents and others are supports, but that they can self-lead. That is the aim now. Very different than what we have been building for the last 40 years.
This is so good. So good. One of the things that I've said in the coaching space for a while now is that the most transformative and sustainable change is that which rises up from within. Not the external pressure, which, like you said, can get to some short-term results. That can even be more like fear-based or guilt or shame-based, and it can produce some results.
Yes, it can.
But the most sustainable and transformative change will happen when it comes from within. And good on you, man. Like, let's just pause to celebrate that win. I know you're a parent. You're a dude. You don't do anything. You don't do everything right.
Oh my gosh. But
there's a win, right? There's a win in the family to be able to celebrate. So good on you.
Thank you. It's and you know what? I need that. Even though I'm in this space, I need encouragement. I was feeling very discouraged this morning, actually. So that's another thing that, guys, we got to make sure that we are encouraging one another. This battle is not an individual battle. It's a team sport. And so, Mark, I thank you for that encouragement. I need it. And for the guys that are listening, be encouraged. This battle is a hard one. And if you feel beat down sometimes, that's normal. Get back up, find some brothers who can walk alongside you, listen to podcasts like this for encouragement and for strategy, and keep going. We got to keep going.
So Matt, I'm going to take you back to when you were like your 16-year-old daughter, or even younger. And who were the voices that did what you're describing? Who were those people for you?
I didn't have voices like that,
Mm.
John, and I think most young people don't. What the voices that I had were people who said, "Get the A," the memorize, pass, and purge, right? As Mark, you mentioned a moment ago. Those were almost the exclusive voices that I heard at me, and I felt, I was a good student. I wasn't a fantastic student. And I always felt like, I'm just kind of barely drifting through this thing. I had no sense of who I was, no sense of like where I was going, what I was on this earth to do. It was just following the standardization covenant, getting my grades, passing, going to the next level, dutifully getting my grades, passing, going to the next level. And it took me years to recognize that I was kind of a zombie. And so part of my work with families over the last 15 years has been a recognition that this mindset is actually a killer for young people. And it goes deep, because even the idea of grades is one thing that maybe we can talk about later in the show. But all these structures that tell the child, you're good if you do X, Y, and Z, but you're not good if you don't. And that causes a lot of kids. It leads to depression. It leads to utter confusion around like, kind of, what am I here for? And it sets up a young person to, I think, to be captured by ways of thinking that say, you're okay if you follow us. We don't buy into what the dominant culture is saying around, grades and conformity. Be a nonconformist like us in this way that, frankly, oftentimes is negative, right? Drugs, alcohol, all those kind of traps are really a putting the thumb in the eye of the structures of conformity that are out there. Never have most of the families I work with never has the question come up, who's the child you want to give to the world? Right? Be clear about that child, and then start to grow that child, regardless of what society is telling you about what a quote unquote good young person is. Grow the child that you believe God has called you to put in the world, and that's your bar. That's your measurement right there.
So at some point, I'm assuming there was a shift. I'm not sure that's the right word. When did that happen for you?
It's more of an awakening. And it happened when I was probably late 20s. And it came through reading books that challenged, again, dominant structures around what the good life looks like. Some of it was scriptural books. Other were kind of personal finance books that really challenged how, freedom is achieved. And when I talk about freedom, I talk about financial freedom, but I also talk about the freedom to live a life not having to worry about the people in your charge. And so as I started to read these books, I began to kind of look around and say, gosh, success is not what has been sold to me. Success is something actually very, very different. And so that began, a process of kind of challenging what I was taught, and increasingly being confident, being, again, a bit of a nonconformist, contrarian, because I am on a journey that's unique to me. And as a result, and frankly, that journey, y'all, is highly influenced by what I feel God has put me on this earth to do. Not how the society says that you're only successful if you're making this amount of money, or you have thick hair. If you could see me, I do not have thick hair, bald as a mango. But all this to say is that the awakening happened in around late 20s. I so wish I had somebody giving me the freedom to think, the freedom to explore, the freedom to ask the question, God, who'd you call me to be? Like, and some of the tools to do that. It's unfortunate, but I pledged to make sure my kids didn't have that circumstance.
Matt, this is an interesting question. I am not a history buff or intelligent enough to really know the answer to my question historically. But we seem today, like this day and age, we seem to be experiencing, I think, more and more of an awakening of re-examining success, re-examining what thinking looks like. Like this is a conversation, but I think it's potentially symptomatic of many conversations that are happening today. You use the word awakening. In your travels and your exposure awareness, would you say that there is a bit of an awakening happening? Or am I trying to connect some dots that maybe can't be connected?
Gosh, I think there is an awakening. Yes. I think it's happening for people under 30. It's not happening for people over 30. I think most of us have drank the Kool-Aid and we define what success is and we're putting our head down and we're trying to get there. But like I began, I'll tell you a quick story. I was a director at a hospital, and I remember very clearly being in a leadership development program at the hospital to kind of prepare you for the next level of leadership. And everybody at that next level were either divorced, had kids that were quite troubled or estranged, had serious, like the families, the vice president levels had serious health issues. And I was like, well, wait a second. I quit. Like, this was part of my awakening. I'm like, well, how can you define success if you've got all these family dynamics? Like you're making a lot of money, you're vice president, et cetera. Like, is that how I want to define success? And at the end of that leadership experience, I was like, nope, that's not how I'm going to define success. And I began to, move away from that. But I mean, how you define success is also one of these kind of underlying questions. And that requires a good deal of reflection, prayer, talking to elders. There's a whole conversation about the intergenerational transfer that doesn't happen like it used to. But again, this is all part of a broader strategy of how do you, as a dad, as a parent, grow a young person train them in the way they should go, right? It's all part of that strategy.
That it feels like maybe I'm skipping around, but I'm just kind of following these thoughts as they come. That thought, that idea has translated into a question for you that is a very disruptive question. You mentioned it a bit ago. I'm not going to get it right, but basically the question of like the question of not what are you going to be when you grow up, but from the parental perspective, who are you giving into the world? Say the question the way you like to say it, and then spend a minute talking about what that really means.
Sure. Who's the child that you want to give to the world? That's the question. Again, it catches a lot of parents flat-footed. But when we start to really have conversations about that, most parents come to almost the same kind of child, an honest person, a person that it can be a great spouse, that can be a great citizen, can be a great neighbor, someone who is a producer, not a consumer, someone who is a lover of justice and mercy. Like, these are the components of what every parent wants in their child, but we get sold a bill of goods that, no, I got to get my child to college, and not just any college. It's got to be the right college. And because then I got to get them, they've got to get the right job, and not just any job, but the right job. But when we back up and we ask the question, who's the child you want to give to the world? Then we start to see there are these elements of character, of values that matter. And now the question is, parent, you've got to make a choice. If the path your child is on currently is going to get you and your child to that place that you want them to be, then stay on it. But if you can see what a low probability it is that your child will be the child that you want to give to the world if you stay on the pathway that you're on, then you have to decide, how do I get off that pathway? Does that make sense?
does.
So it creates this conflict in the mind of the parent, and then really then I can actually work with them, because they have to decide, do I really want this young person that I want to give to the world, or do I want the world's definition of success, which is money, fame, power?
What did you have to go through for that question to surface in you?
Okay, well, another story, and this is one I've struggled to be quick about telling, but when my son was 5, he was about to start kindergarten, and we did all of the work to find the right kindergarten. Right, in Houston, we can do school choice, and we were choosing, the quote unquote the right public school, the school that was going to prepare them for college and job opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. The week before school started, however, the principal, this is crazy, 2008, August 23rd, 2008, the principal was in the news because she had been telling her staff that she wanted her grandson, who was starting kindergarten that same year, to be in a class with other good white neighborhood kids. And she told her staff this several times. The staff was horrified, obviously. There was some alleged behavior that the principal's actually moving kids, from her child's class to others and vice versa to achieve that goal that she had. This all came out the week before school started, and the principal apologized for making the statement, but not for the motivation behind it. And in the course of 3 days, we went from we're all focused on getting our kid the best college, the best educational experience, the best schooling experience possible, to us going, wait a second. We just put our trust in an institution, and that institution's not playing right by us. Okay, what do we want? Let's be clear what is actually we want, because leaving him in that school would have kind of put him on the best quote unquote path to college and career, but taking him out gave us the freedom to put him on the path towards a man of honor, a man of dignity, a man of justice, and a man of integrity. So that was how it kind of shook us out of a bit of a slumber, but it also caused us to really clarify who's the person that we want to give to the world. And thank God, he is now 19 years old, almost 20, and he is everything that I described. He's a fantastic, fantastic young man. And by the way, later on, he went back to public school, graduated as a valedictorian, not because he was grade grubbing, but because he was really curious. Not because he was trying to be a valedictorian, but because he loved to learn. And that's one of the things that I actually wanted. I wanted a child who loves learning. And again, I just am so pleased that that principal behaved in the way she did, because I would have never experienced what's possible if we did our own thing and followed a completely different path. And now I teach other parents how to do the same.
Matt, in your story, you kept saying us. So I guess it's a safe assumption. That means you and your wife had conversations about this, right?
Yes.
Speak to that. How did you include, what did that look like? What's her role in this? How do y'all do that together? Speak to that.
Yeah. Well, we did it better, I think, the first 10 years, and then we've struggled since a little bit. But again, the way it worked for us was, as we began to define, these broader definitions of success, then we had to start shaping our lives in order to achieve that goal, right? If I defined success as having a beautiful body or running a sub 3-minute marathon, I'd have to shift my life.
You meant 3 hours, not 3 minutes, right?
Yeah, 3 hours, really 3 minutes.
Right.
Yes, 3 hours. I'd have to shift my life dramatically in order to achieve that. And so we had to shift our work life. We had to shift our social life in order to make our family and our child's development as kind of one of our key ministry areas. And so my wife worked part-time, and I looked for jobs. Actually, I quit the job I was telling you about a few minutes ago. I left because I couldn't stay there and prioritize my family. My wife ended up working part-time. We ended up putting things together, creating jobs or finding jobs that would fit our family rather than finding jobs that would fit the income that we expected and then trying to force our family into it. So that's when things get really hard, when the money starts to come into the play, right? How can I raise a child who's of high integrity if I'm not really in their life very often, right? Or maybe just in their life in the evening for a couple hours, but they're tired and they're about to go to bed. I really can't shape that. I can't form that child to the degree that I would have wanted to. Can I afford it? Well, maybe you can't. I talked to a lot of parents about finances. I talked to a parent yesterday about finances and how they actually can't afford a lot. But the parent I talked to yesterday bought a $70,000 truck. And that requires a certain amount of work. That then requires a certain amount of time away from the home. That then requires someone else to be responsible for raising and forming that child. So these are the things that do get baked into being strategic. But again, if you're clear about the child you want to give to the world, you got to make trade-offs. And again, that's kind of how we did it.
Matt, react to this statement, if you would. The way parents parent and drive their kids down certain paths has more to do with insecurity and fear within the parent than it does really anything else.
Yes. So oftentimes, and everybody struggles with this, myself, I bet you guys did as well. It's the temptation for your child to be everything that you weren't. Right. And when you see your child who's he's got a great swing and you were a baseball player, and boy, if someone had taken me under their wing at age 5, I could have been somebody on the ball field. The temptation for dad to go, oh, here's my shot, right? This kid is going to be everything I wasn't. Very tempting, especially in an environment where, sports celebrity is one of the highest, I don't know, highest aim or highest, most celebrated individuals in our society. It's hard not to get swept up into that. But as parents, again, go back to that question, that guiding question: who is the child I want to give to the world? And if your answer is, I want to give the best baseball player ever, okay, I'm not that child's parent. You are. If that's your aim, then do it. Go for it. I'm going to be the first though to tell you that that's going to be a very disappointing and struggle. You're going to struggle with that big time. But yes, all of us struggle with this sense of, I want my child to be everything I wasn't. We have to, I think, keep going back to this question: who's the child you want to give to the world? And sometimes I'll use the language of who's the child that God is called to give to the world. And it leads to pretty much the same answer.
So thinking about really applying that question, because that's new language for me, although I took a path that was similar, but maybe different language. But thinking about that path, who is the child that you want to give to the world? To do that well means, I think, you really have to know who that child is.
Yes.
And who that child was meant to be or is to be becoming, which is why you can say, if you want the best professional baseball player that possible, great, but you're going to be disappointed if that's not who that child was created to be. I can see you nodding your head. I think we're aligned here.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So again, some people challenge me when I say the parent should be asking this question, because a lot of folks will say, no, it's not the parent's job to ask that question. It's the parent's job to ask the child what they want to be and who they want to be. But the challenge with that is most young people don't like. I watch my child from day one, and I see tendencies. I see patterns. I see patterns of behavior, patterns of strength, right? Patterns of weaknesses. I have a vantage point over that child that is unique in the entire world, right? So I can see things that child has no earthly awareness of. And that's very much like any coach who's watching the player on the field and going, boy, that young man is has great hands, right? The kid may not realize it. So as a parent, asking that question then should force you to also blend it with who is that child. Who, again, language I would use also is, who did God make that child into? And so now how do we blend these values and kind of character questions into the practical things of, this child has a way of seeing the world visually that is quite remarkable. Maybe there's some artistic dynamics here that the child is telling me is who God made her to be. And I've got one of those in my house, actually. I've got another quick story. Here's a place where I struggled, right? So there's my youngest wanted to be, and early on said she loved theater and acting. And my immediate reaction was, oh, no, we're not going to have, an actress in this house. We're not going to have somebody who's all about image and, look at me, everybody, and, all this stuff, right? But as I watched her, I saw that she actually had a lot of skills in performance and communication. And I challenged myself because I was quick to say that's not who God made you to be, but I didn't know. Turns out God actually gave her some things that are pretty amazing. And she's won some awards for her acting. She's been a professional actor at age 15. I mean, it's all these things happen when I got out of the way. And so parents, again, if you're creating a self-learner, at some point you got to get out of the way and you got to let that self-learner pursue the things that are on their heart, trusting that the early years is how you've kind of formed their character. And from that point on, they will be, in this case, potentially an actress who is of high character. And those, that outcome is one that I can't really control, but she's really on the path, and it's really fun to watch.
So Matt, I'll follow your language there. There's a difference in kids, obviously. Some are very highly self-learning, self-motivated. Mm-hmm. And, not every kid is self-motivated. They may lack motivation for whatever reason. What's the difference in the coaching approach, as we talked about, or the parenting approach to those different children that you're going to have? You are going to have different kids.
Yes.
How do you do that?
So I would challenge that first off by saying, I think every kid is actually self-motivated, but they're motivated in ways that we may not fully appreciate. Mm-hmm. So the way that what I usually coach parents and how to proceed on this, like from a practical point of view, is as you're watching your child, see the things that they actually have interest in and start writing them down, because frankly, we'll forget oftentimes. Start writing them down. See the skills that you see in them that are unique and different than other kids that you might have seen, and write them down. And as the child begins to grow, you'll start to develop a list of areas that child has some maybe special talents or special interests. Mm-hmm. Those are the areas where that child can develop the habit of self-motivation, the skills of self-motivation, self-leadership. Mm-hmm. So once you identify those, ask the child which of these you'd like to explore, and then create a learning journey around that topic. And that's where the coaching comes in again. So let's, again, back to my daughter who was interested in theater. And I said, okay, well, you've indicated this. Obviously you have some interests here. So now let's build a learning journey about it. And it's not just being on the stage. It is, you're going to understand everything there is to know about theater. You're going to understand how to network. You're going to understand how the lighting works. You're going to understand how to, comport yourself as an actress, but you'll also understand how to write and how to market it. You'll understand the box office. Like you're going to go deep in this. And as she did, she started to see that there were certain areas within the theater she had real interest and others that she didn't. But again, it was her defining it. Mm-hmm. She reached out and said, to one of the theater companies, I'd love to do an internship or some sort of volunteer experience in learning about costume design. Completely off my radar, but she did an experience in costume design, did another experience kind of back of house building sets and things like that, all on her own. She called the people, She scheduled and created the opportunity. She experienced it. And then she came away going, that was cool. I liked this part, didn't like this part. So again, if we find the areas of interest to the child and give them a little bit of support and coaching on how they can develop an understanding of that area of interest, you're teaching them how to self-lead. And then they can take those same skills and apply it anywhere. Right now, she's actually interested in being a pilot. She's doing the exact same thing she did with theater in the space of pilot. Completely unrelated industries, by the way. But, she's got lots of interests and gifts, like I believe all kids do. We have to, as parents, we've got to coach them on exploring their gifts rather than quieting and kind of hiding their gifts because they've got to create this, pathway towards A's and B's in their classroom. That's the real challenge here. We've got to give more space for young people to see who God made them to be and to explore it. And unfortunately, oftentimes school disrupts that process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and parents do too. And as I heard you challenge that thought of not all kids are self-motivated, which is a good challenge. It feels like parents have the opportunity to accept whatever does motivate their kids, like you just in your own story.
Yes.
So whatever your expectation is,
And here's where it gets hard, John. When a child grows up watching a lot of videos or playing a lot of video games, and you ask them, what are you interested in? I love playing video games. Oh, what? Really? But, and this is something I've done with a lot of parents. Okay, let's use that interest as an opportunity to explore everything there is to know about video games, not just playing it, but the music, the scores on these video games nowadays are incredible. Let's explore the scores. Possible even learning instrument and replicating some of those scores. Let's explore the dialogue. Let's explore the marketing of it. The company, the business around it, the legal. You can do a huge learning journey on any topic if you give the child the ability to describe the area that they want to explore, and then the coaching comes in to fill the gaps around that.
We don't have enough time for all these questions in our heads, but I'll just ask one more down this lane. So it feels like parents themselves are challenged about their own openness.
Yes.
Not necessarily just about their kids. I feel like you're describing the challenge that adults have about their own openness to any topic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, go.
Okay.
Go.
So here's probably the most important thing in this conversation. And that is we are entering a very, very different world, right? A world where individual interests can create incredible opportunities. Back, when I was coming up, you had to get a college degree if you wanted to enter into certain opportunities. Now we've reached what's called a permissionless society, where if I want to, at the age of 10, want to begin to be a marketing consultant, I can do that. If I want to learn, and talk to a guy last night in my running group, he's 25, he's interested in physics and psychology. He's actually an engineer, but he's moving out of engineering to do all these other things. And he knows that now, in a permissionless society, he can learn about all those areas without anybody granting him permission. And as he does, because he's interested in it, he will ascend into a level of expertise much more rapidly than someone who is traditionally taught and forced to learn stuff they're not interested in. And that creates these incredibly interesting opportunities that were not possible 20 years ago, but they are possible today. And going forward, like 10 years from now, it's going to be on. My daughter, who's interested in theater and flight, in 10 years, she will hopefully, the next generation, she'll have her pilot's license at age 16. And she will have been acting and learning about the entire industry of theater at age 12. And she'll be creating a portfolio of experiences and victories that she will take with her and continue to build upon for the rest of her life. And that is the difference between the old model and the new model of work. And we're seeing it everywhere now.
And there's a beautiful parallel here that I see of parents having to learn the spiritual challenge of you're not in control here.
Yes.
God's in control here, and even in your own life. Just that's a foundational spiritual truth that we're talking about. We just haven't said it yet.
No doubt. As much as we may want to program our children to be the next, superstar in any area or endeavor, that is not our call. And more often than not, we get in the way of God's design by, stepping in front of them and trying to make our kids into something that we want. Something that our society will value or praise. And that is definitely not what we're called to do as parents. We're called to train them up in the way they should go. And God will take it from there.
One of the biggest insights for me in coaching has been that I don't have to have all the answers for you.
Yes.
And even when I show up with the best intent and I give you my answers, I'm not doing you as much justice as when I simply ask questions.
That's right.
And taking that approach, Matt, has transformed really the way I show up in parenting, because I don't have to figure out anymore what's best for my child as I think it best in terms of path or the direction, the choices that they need to make. And taking it one step further, I don't have to be responsible for the choices that they make as they launch into their maturity, their adultness, or in the way we say it here, into their manhood. Like, those two things for me as a parent have been revolutionary.
Yes, it's freeing. There's that word again. It creates a freedom. And again, the aim I have, and when I'm working with families, and it sounds like we're on the same page about this, is to create young men who are able to self-lead early in their life, which then allows the parent to back away and to let the child lead. Again, always standing next to them as a support or guide along the side, but not taking responsibility for where that child leads. And it is a wonderfully freeing experience for the parent as well as the child. And it's a complete mindset shift than anything we came up with. And that's the real challenge, helping young families, young dads shift to a new way of approaching parenting.
So Matt, bringing it back to kind of where we started with the school and the education, like we've been talking about education generally, but maybe there's a way to make this a little bit more practical. When it comes to school, there's a lot of evidence, like this kind of set the context here. There's a lot of evidence that the system is not working for boys.
Yes.
And so for the dads listening, kind of set the table for what isn't working, and then maybe we can move toward what options, what the possibility really is when it comes to the process of educating our kids.
Yeah. So this is one that really, dads, I hope you lean into a little bit. When we talk about boys in school, just Google challenges of boys in school, and you'll get a ton of feedback about it, from the number of boys in special education to the number of boys who are diagnosed with attention deficit disorder or learning disabilities, the number of boys that are sitting in a classroom that really is not designed for a high energy young person, particularly boys who are usually like to climb on things and throw things and run around things. It is just not designed. In fact, if I were to think about what environment would I design that would frustrate a young boy, I would design a school. Right? So now, as you think about young boys in their early adolescence, 12, 13, 14, you're seeing profound levels of student disengagement, of learner disengagement, of from dropping out to negative social behaviors. It's almost a plague, but we don't usually talk about it because the boys that are struggling are usually the problem is usually put on the boys. And that's really quite unfair, but we see it all the time. So given that, what should a dad do? The first, I think, is to recognize that we are in a bit of an inflection point for dads. For the last 50 years or so, the responsibility for educating or schooling of a child was generally given to the mom, right? Dads were out earning a living, whatever, right? But now we're in a space where the skills of work, the skills of business, or the skills of leadership are things that young people need to learn early. Again, think about Facebook followers. That's the worst thing I would want for my child, is to follow anybody but Jesus Christ himself. But yet we are really promoting followership. Dads have a unique pattern of creating leaders. So when we talk to dads, you got to rethink your role. Your role now is as a head coach, a person who's paying very close attention to the patterns of behavior that you're seeing in your child. And you are engaging early and often in helping to form and to reshape those patterns toward something that's more productive. Again, a producer rather than a consumer, a leader rather than a follower, someone who loves to learn rather than someone who's just purely pursuing grades in order to satisfy the teacher or the school system. So dads, think of yourself as the strategist around your child's life. And as a strategist, this is where dads, I think, really love to engage. What are the things that need to happen differently? Let's be creative about this. What are the lessons that this child needs to learn? What are the experiences that this child could learn at the age of 10 that help them realize that life is bigger than social media? If dads start to think as a strategist, like a coach on the sidelines, they will start to see steps ahead. They will start to see around corners. They will start to anticipate problems that are going to be coming at their boys, and they will get ahead of it. More often than not, our dads are trying to engage after the pain has been, after the child has struggled and is disengaged. And that's, again, never too late, but you don't want to go there. You want to go early and often. And so that's kind of what I would encourage dads to really be thinking about. How can I really take all these energies of leadership and strategy that I see in sports and in military and in business, and now apply that to the most important person on this planet that I've been given responsibility for leading, and that is my child, and particularly my boy. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, let me say it back this way, because this is what's surfacing for me as I hear you talk. So the last 50 years or so, dads have gone off into the marketplace as the provider of financial means.
Yes.
And we've come to think of providing as just the breadwinner or the paycheck, and I mean, we could have a whole episode just on that. But if you grant that that's how we've defined providing, and that the father has generally been in that provider role, what I hear you saying is it's time to think about providing in a much broader context. It isn't just about the money or the bread. It's about the learning journey and the culture of the family, the environment in which the growing up and the educating takes place. Like, once again, we're zooming out and seeing what we've taken and run with as providing financially in a different, bigger light. At least that's what's coming up for me.
No, that's very well said. Right. It's if you just provide financially, but the children are off the rails, again, if your definition of success is having a certain amount of money, you may have achieved it. But there's no pain greater than watching your children go off the rails, right? And that's what we're trying to prevent. And for the families where it's already happening, that's where we're trying to support dads to re-engage, because your influence is the most powerful influence over a child, and it will always be. Whether or not we actually claim it or not is really the question.
Mm. So we've been at this great conversation for a bit, and there are still guys that are listening. They're with us, and yet we've covered a lot of ground. And so let me ask you, Matt, to just focus in on if there's one thing the dad could take away from this conversation, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say spend a lot of time thinking about what success is for you as you're on your deathbed, or maybe even think like 20 years from now or 15 years from now. What does a successful man look like? And again, our world will tell you a successful man has money, power, and fame. But look at those people who have money, power, and fame, and look at what's happening outside of their life, of their public life, their families, their multiple marriages, their kids that are off the rails. We've got to appreciate that person is not successful. We got to define it differently. And if your father does begin to define success more carefully, I think that we'll get to a place where what you're describing in terms of a much bigger and greater and more valuable impact on that young man will be had. And so that's the question I would challenge every dad to explore. What is success? And defend that success and pursue it.
So good. Matt, where are you hanging out socially or virtually? How can people get a hold of you, follow you with a little F, or even connect with you and go a little bit deeper?
Sure. Yeah. Best way. So I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn, and that's Matthew C. Barnes on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And also my website is theeducationgame.com, The Education Game. The idea there is that you can play any game two ways. You can play it to win in the short term, or you can play it to win in the long term. I'm going to encourage dads to think about the long term of education. And I'm going to be launching a new website in a couple of weeks here as well. And that'll be mattcbarnes.com. And you'll get more information there in the coming weeks.
So good. So good. Thank you for giving us your time, for all the work that you're doing as a dangerous, in a good way, a positively dangerous disruptor. And Matt, the reminder that like the responsibility of being a father is big. It's a big one. And it's a calling, and it can be heavy at times. For sure, it can be heavy at times. But we need to continue to remember we have a narrow window with which we can make significant impact on our kids, and the opportunity is there. And so thank you for showing us a different way to engage, a bigger, broader way to think about schooling and education. And like I'm you said this before, like if only I could go back and do over, and I can't, you can't, we can't, but all of this for the benefit of those that are coming behind us who can do it better the first time around. It's so good. So thank you for what you're doing, the impact you're making, and sharing a little bit of that with us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, guys, I don't know how you process this conversation. I don't know what you heard, what resonated with you, what didn't. But I hope there was something in here that was inspiring, even challenging you to take a bigger role in the education of both your son as well as all of your kids. Perhaps the invitation for you is a subtle twist, a subtle change, a tweak, if you will, in how you're showing up. Or perhaps it's a radical shift like what happened in Matt's life. I don't know. But I invite you to sit with that, whatever that is for you, and have the courage and the vision to take that step for your children, for your son, for your kids, as well as for you, the parent, and for your spouse, to find that freedom and that enjoyment that Matt talks about when your kids become self-motivated and self-learning. and you can just encourage them and coach them along on their journey. I hope that's what you took from this, and you can put it into practice and experience the benefits that come as a result of parenting in this way. Well, guys, that's it for today. Thank you once again for being with us, for being part of this community, for doing the work that you are doing to help raise healthy and godly men, because when we do that, we can change the world. Okay, we'll put a bow on it here. Until next week, same bad time, same bad channel. Adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.